Very funny.
We now give you our brand new little sweetheart of swing.
Welcome to Stay Tuned, the show for animation lovers, recorded live on YouTube and also streaming on Patreon. Coming to you from Austin, Texas, I'm your host, Phil Machi. Thank you so much for joining me this evening. Our animated journey tonight takes us to the town of Whoville with a Dr. Seuss retelling from Illumination Entertainment, the folks who brought us the Minions. All that, and you'll have a chance to share your thoughts, questions, and opinions with me for a live Q&A after the show. With tons of films finding their way back into theaters through Fathom events and the like, should an annual classic be remade in the first place? You know, something that hasn't been forgotten on the shelves of film history. Something we're all so familiar with, you couldn't imagine seeing it any other way? Well, the short answer is, it just happened. Again. And I'm going to tell you all about how this latest Grinchy installment sizes up to its 1966 counterpart in just a few moments. But first, this. Every Who down in Whoville liked Christmas a lot. But the Grinch, who lived just north of Whoville, did not. And that's the premise for Dr. Seuss's story, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, from 1957. We've got this Grinch guy up on a mountaintop with a severe case of "Get off my lawn, you lousy kids!" for an entire town of people who love Christmas. Tonight's First Impressions review is about the version currently in theaters, but of course you know I'm going to mention its other incarnations. Funny how a half-hour TV special from the 60s turned into an annual Christmas tradition. It's the kind of branding any company would love to achieve. In the new film's case, it's also a way to piggyback on a famous intellectual property just in time for the holidays. Now, I know what you're thinking. Phil, you're sounding an awful lot like a Grinch already at the top of this review. And you'd be right. But that's because while I believe multiple interpretations of a book can make for interesting filmmaking, I also get protective of an author's original intentions in communicating a message, especially since the author, Theodore Geisel, directly oversaw production of that first TV special and has sadly since passed on. With a reading out loud time of roughly 12 minutes, the original book was padded out to just under 30 for television. How then do you inflate that half hour out to 86 minutes? The answer? You get inventive. There are two major additions in story to this 2018 version. The first is that of Cindy Lou Who, arguably older than 2 here. She has a theory that only Santa can give her single mom the assistance needed to have a more peaceful life. After a surprise run-in with the Grinch himself, in which neither one realizes the significance of the other, she decides a letter to Santa won't cut it. So, Cindy Lou gathers her little Who friends together with a plan to capture the jolly old elf on Christmas night. This story runs in parallel to the Grinch, as he plots the best way to steal Christmas from Whoville. He goes out on the hunt for some reindeer to pull his sleigh. Comically, this introduces a rather rotund animal who Grinch calls Fred. which leads to some fun bits of comedy where we see the Grinch's frustration at his new live-in pet. As cute as this all is, it undermines the Grinchiness of the whole thing. I don't mind that he has a soft spot for animals, including his dog Max, of course, but I feel the power of this story lies in turning the audience's disdain for the Grinch into genuine love. But I digress. These side quests were fun because they did two things well. One, they both helped to build some suspense leading up to Christmas night. And two, when Fred eventually is reunited with his reindeer family, Grinch finds himself alone again, which emphasizes Illumination's spin on Seuss's story. Of course, there is a natural desire to delve into just what makes a Grinch in the first place. Let's begin with the obvious clues from Seuss's book. It explains the main character's motivation by saying, quote, "Now don't ask me why, no one quite knows the reason," end quote. But here is where things get sticky. Not focusing on his origin story is quite brilliant. It draws the attention of the audience to the Grinch's actions and, in a sense, dehumanizes him. There's a little Seuss pun for you at no charge. If we don't know why he is the way he is, he can easily continue to be the antagonist for the entire story until his miraculous transformation at the last possible moment. To be fair, the Grinch is really a false antagonist. If, however, we spend the entire story sympathizing with the Grinch, it removes the overall punch on his final change of heart. That being said, here's why the 2018 adaptation still works. Dr. Seuss is well known as an author of rhymes, and the narrator of the new film, singer Pharrell Williams, believe it or not, recites the original words in a very approachable manner. In addition, the script features new rhymes mixed in with the old, which aren't exactly seamless for those familiar with the story, but they do the job nicely. This film focuses on how very much alone the Grinch is. We see it in the enormous size of his empty cave dwelling, something not as apparent in the original classic. We see it in his childhood flashback to one particular Christmas where he was alone in an orphanage, and in present day when he rejects the friendship of one particularly clueless Who named Mr. Bricklebaum, voiced by Kenan Thompson. The Grinch is lonely, and this is the stance taken by Illumination's CG interpretation. He's so lonely, in fact, that his new disposition at the end of the film is based on the realization that if he is no longer alone, he no longer hates Christmas. Which is all fine, well and good, but it isn't exactly the same message of the original Grinch. In fact, the Jim Carrey Grinch film changed his motivation too. That film, and yes, I know it isn't animated, gave the Grinch an origin story involving childhood bullying. Making the Grinch the victim absolutely misses the point of Dr. Seuss's story. It doesn't matter why he became a Grinch, folks, because his actions in the present are the focal point. Everything else is a distraction. An interesting distraction, but it's all just a way to embellish a short book into a longer film. Don't just take my word for it. Let's look at what is quite possibly the most important part of the book. Quote, "He stared down at Whoville. The Grinch popped his eyes. Then he shook. What he saw was a shocking surprise. Every Who down in Whoville, the tall and the small, was singing without any presents at all. He hadn't stopped Christmas from coming. It came. Somehow or other, it came just the same. And the Grinch, with his Grinch feet ice cold in the snow, stood puzzling and puzzling. How could it be so? It came without ribbons. It came without tags. It came without packages, boxes, or bags. and he puzzled 3 hours till his puzzler was sore. Then the Grinch thought of something he hadn't before. Maybe Christmas, he thought, doesn't come from a store. Maybe Christmas, perhaps, means a little bit more. End quote. I suppose I shouldn't be surprised that this message has been lost in translation twice now. How the Grinch Stole Christmas is a story of anti-consumerism. We can't exactly say it's religious in nature, since no claims are made in the texts. But what is stated is clear. Christmas is something that cannot be defined by stuff. Now, I can't speak for the rest of the world, but as far as the culture in the United States is concerned, this isn't exactly a popular concept. We needn't look any further than a certain giant of the retail world with their recent holiday ad featuring singing gift boxes. This is a holiday ad using a Jackson 5 song that centers around the unity of the human race, coming from shipping boxes filled with stuff. If ever we needed to hear the original message from Dr. Seuss, it's now. But we're here to look at an animated film, so story aside, let's talk visuals, shall we? Illumination has crafted a colorful, Seuss-based world that is a real treat to look at. From the super stylized mountains to the outrageously inventive musical instruments and architecture, it's a film that clearly takes inspiration from the source material. That being said, I could have done with a bit more whimsy overall. Much of the story takes place in the wilderness outside of Whoville and at times has a tendency to feel plain. Still though, it's hard to complain when you see the intricate details of bits of snow clinging to each individual hair on the Grinch's furry face. The movie is beautiful. The residents of Whoville are fun to watch, and there is a real playfulness that permeates all of the Illumination movies. For me, the standout character was actually Grinch's dog, Max. The team at Illumination did a fantastic job creating a companion that is sympathetic and expressive. One of my biggest concerns going into The Grinch was the music. I say this because the original Grinch cartoon has 3 truly memorable songs by Albert Haig that are hard to live up to. Like many beloved animated stories, the music becomes a character too. It's the voice of the thing. So, what do you do when tasked with remaking a classic? You go in a different direction while paying homage to the original. Tyler, the Creator, collaborated with Danny Elfman on the soundtrack with a new rendition of You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch, that is literally half as long as the original. Coming in at just under a minute and a half, his version is definitely more modern and has its roots in R&B. And as catchy as it may be, it doesn't live up to its predecessor. But then again, I don't think that was the goal, since the song gets out of the way in the first act of the film. It's safe to say that people who go to see a movie inspired by the first holiday classic are going to be expecting some form of that famous Thurl Ravenscroft performance, which is really the danger when approaching a remake like this. Don't get me wrong, I'm not knocking the efforts of Tyler, the Creator, it's just that I'm not convinced an R&B modernization was the best choice here and sort of feels out of place in the film itself. As a fun side note, one of the lyrics unique to the new song refers to not visiting the Grinch on Halloween night. I have to wonder if this is a nod to the 1977 film Halloween is Grinch Night. Danny Elfman provides a suitable score underneath the rest of the film. His sweeping strings are more playful than anything. There are a few standout moments to the score, but overall, it felt restrained somehow. He even tossed in callbacks to O Tannenbaum, the Christmas song, and Albert Haig's Welcome Christmas. But when you have someone like Danny Elfman composing for your film, Jack Skellington himself, It would have made much more sense to let him run wild. Why not have Elfman create an entirely new Grinch song that has little to no resemblance to anything pre-existing? All the incredible music he wrote for the modern holiday classic, The Nightmare Before Christmas, I'm sure he would be up to the challenge. In fact, in a recent article with Elfman, he states, quote, "I grew up on Dr. Seuss, and I actually credit him with myself as a lyric writer. All the Nightmare Before Christmas songs are really inspired by Dr. Seuss metering and rhythm in the lyrics. The musicality, the metric quality, it all goes back to Dr. Seuss," end quote. I'm all for new collaborations, but the placement of this one isn't my favorite. Vocally, Benedict Cumberbatch steps up as this latest Grinch. Having big shoes to fill would be the understatement of the year. I mean, good luck following Boris Karloff, right? Not to mention Bob Holt, Hans Conried, and Jim Carrey have taken up the mantle since, and each in their own right have contributed to the role, animated or otherwise. Overall, Cumberbatch does the part justice with a certain bitterness that works well. And while he lacks the Karloff bravado that demands attention, by the end of the film you will absolutely believe the voice and the green furball are one and the same. And speaking of the Grinch, I mentioned his fantastic fur, right? But if I'm being honest, I miss how downright dastardly he appeared in the Chuck Jones cartoon. With that creepy smile, prominently defined teeth, and piercing eyes. In comparison, the new version is downright cuddly. Which is fine if your goal is to steer clear of scaring children a bit. Personally, I think a little bit of unsettling is the telltale sign of a memorable fable, which is precisely what Dr. Seuss's book is. The 2018 Grinch takes a different approach to the holiday spirit with an emphasis on togetherness. And while this isn't the same as anti-consumerism leads to an appreciation of your fellow man, I can still get behind this heartfelt angle. It's certainly reminiscent of hearing all the Who's singing about clasping hands together to celebrate Christmas without any presents. We are a social species, and the vast majority of people don't enjoy being completely alone for very long. In fact, any commercialized holiday that forces on togetherness can really sting when you're all by yourself. I'm looking at you, Valentine's Day. So, when the Grinch finally accepts others and is in turn accepted by the Who's, despite the horrible things he's done, it's touching. You really feel for the guy, and of course, no one wants to see him sitting alone in his mountain of solitude, especially on Christmas. Illumination communicated this quite well, even if the story drags on in parts. With new aspects of the story, like the Grinch taking a stroll through Whoville early in the film, and a really funny pursuing gang of Christmas carolers bit, there's enough here to enjoy. Will it be worth re-watching every Christmas season? Possibly, but for all its trimmings, it doesn't take the place of what Chuck Jones, Boris Karloff, and Dr. Seuss brought to the world decades ago. I'm giving The Grinch 7 out of 10 cans of Who hash. As always, we're about to take a short intermission where we'll listen to a little music from tonight's feature. This is where I would play some music, but I'm not going to do that tonight because it is a very current song and I'm pretty sure YouTube's going to flag me for copyright infringement. So if you want to hear all of this episode in its entirety, head on over to Patreon. Anyway, that was You're a Mean One, Mr. Grinch, in a collaboration of Tyler the Creator and Danny Elfman. These two musical minds also spawned a fun original song that plays over the ending credits called I Am the Grinch. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Thanks so much to all of you listening in live on YouTube. Hey, if you enjoyed the show and would like to listen anytime, why don't you join me over on Patreon? at patreon.com/PhilMachi and become a subscriber today. Not only are there cool rewards, but you can also stream this show anytime you like, which means never missing an episode. And for more fun, check out my original comics at retailsunshine.com, and you can interact with me on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook under the handles of both Retail Sunshine and Phil Machi. Also, you can keep up to date with the latest animation news by visiting this show at facebook.com/Stay Tooned Show. I've been Phil Machi, you've been a wonderful audience, and until next time, keep those eyeballs peeled, those ears open, and be sure to stay tuned. I meant to check before I did this show if it was the Jackson 5 or Michael Jackson. So I'm just going to say Michael Jackson's. Okay. Or Michael Jackson. There we go. I've got it recorded in case I need it later. But, yeah. So, I don't know if you guys are aware of the commercial I'm talking about with the singing boxes. I didn't necessarily want to say what company that was. But if you've seen the commercial, I'm sure you're aware of what I was referring to. Yeah. If you haven't seen it, it's Amazon. Spoiler alert. Yeah. So, welcome to the after party. You have made it. You made it through my wonderful Grinch story, and now we're here to hang out until the top of the hour, talking about all things Grinch.